One of the more notable and distinctive characteristics of the Ukraine war, other than it being the largest and bloodiest ground war in Europe since World War II, is the routine use of nuclear threats toward adversaries. Russia has issued most of these threats, but France participates occasionally. Political leaders are becoming so accustomed to these threats that they rarely raise an eyebrow, even when they cross multiple red lines, despite the presence of nuclear weapons. Has this war shown that nuclear threats and the presence of nuclear weapons are no longer the deterrents they were during the Cold War? The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists published an article that discussed the widespread use of nuclear threats and the lack of fear they evoke in Western politicians. The publication posed the question of what constitutes a nuclear threat to professionals involved in nuclear policy issues. The consensus was that there was no definition of a nuclear threat, but these experts attempted to define what one is. Hans Christensen from the Nuclear Information Project and Russian independent nuclear analyst Pavel Podvig agreed that a nuclear threat has to have two parts. 1. A statement projecting a country's nuclear power. 2. A significant action to display that nuclear power, such as a weapon deployment of the weapons in a drill or exercise. The point is not made, but these two must coincide closely to link the two actions. George Perkovich from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace defines a nuclear threat as an explicit, consequential statement from a nuclear power to an adversary that unless the adversary fulfills certain criteria, it faces a nuclear response. Mr. Perkovich adds that based on this definition, there has never been a nuclear threat. The nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki did not pose a nuclear threat because the nuclear bomb was still classified as secret at the time of their use. What we are experiencing today from political leaders such as President Putin of Russia are signals and not nuclear threats. We define signals as non-explicit reminders of nuclear power. Mr. Perkovich's definition more accurately describes a nuclear threat as an ultimatum that could trigger a nuclear response. After the US authorized Ukraine to use ATACMS missiles against Russian targets, Russia launched an intermediate-range ballistic missile, or IRBM, against a target in Ukraine. Just 2 days prior, on November the 19th, President Putin made a public declaration to lower the threshold for using nuclear weapons in response to a conventional or nuclear attack, as well as the option to use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear adversary. In response to the attack, Russia launched an IRBM with a MIRV warhead against Ukraine. The IRBM's nature and use as part of the major nuclear powers' nuclear risk reduction protocols required Russia to notify China and the US of its launch. According to Mr. Christensen and Mr. Podvig's definition, the use of the IRBM and MIRV, along with Russia's nuclear threshold changes and the crossing of a public red line, constitutes a nuclear threat. The declaration of Russia's nuclear power, the public declaration of the threshold shift, and the deployment of a weapon, an IRBM that necessitated nuclear notification and utilized a MIRV warhead specifically designed for nuclear weapons, were all part of the scenario. However, Mr. Perkovich viewed the change in nuclear policy and the launch of the IRBM as merely a nuclear signal. There was no explicit threat that a nuclear response would occur if Ukraine used ATACMS. Based on his definition, he is correct. The problem lies in the fact that Mr. Perkovich's definition of a nuclear threat may not align with the reality that nuclear weapons serve not only as weapons of war, but also as political and psychological tools. The presence of nuclear weapons on the chessboard serves as a deterrent, and their use has a psychological impact on the populations they threaten. According to Mr. Perkovich, a nuclear threat is a military action, similar to President H.W. Bush's declaration on February 23, 1991, that Iraq's Saddam Hussein had until noon EST to leave Kuwait or face a ground war. Mr. Perkovich's definition of a nuclear threat is similar to President H.W. Bush's declaration that Iraq's Saddam Hussein had until noon EST on February 23, 1991 to leave Kuwait or face a ground war. From a political perspective, Perkovich's definitions are excessively strict, given that the political utility of nuclear weapons lies in their perceived threat. The possession of nuclear weapons serves as a deterrent, potentially discouraging another country from taking action. This deterrent is a warning of the power of the nuclear-armed state. Nuclear weapons, from a political point of view, or of political utility, are that no specific warning is needed, for the threat of nuclear weapons is real. This is why a verifiable demonstration of nuclear capability is necessary to establish both a nuclear capability and a nuclear deterrent. The Israelis have never acknowledged they have nuclear weapons, but they have expressed their presence through channels, confirming the nuclear capabilities. Additionally, the threat of nuclear weapons can influence a population, leading them to either become more aggressive, demanding action against the threat, or demand a change in direction. Politicians must respond to the demands of the population, and the mere overt threat of nuclear weapons can trigger an emotional response that extends beyond mere military or political concerns. Much of this argument is semantics, and it cannot be said that Mr. Perkovich's, Mr. Christiansen's or Mr. Podvig's definition is right or wrong, since there is no accepted definition. Mr. Perkovich's extreme definition characterizes Russian nuclear threats as signals and downplays their significance. Politicians of nuclear states value the mere existence of nuclear weapons as a utility, and most would prefer that the utility of the nuclear threat extends beyond merely setting specific conditions for its use. It cannot be said that the constant use of nuclear threats or nuclear signals will make nuclear war more likely. The use of them can cause a pause in political decisions or a psychological impact on a population. Constant use of these threats can numb politicians and populations to the point of meaninglessness. Like all threats, at some point they have to be acted upon and not consistently ignored, or they are used consistently, and their deterrent benefit is reduced or eliminated. When we minimize or eliminate the deterrent effect of nuclear weapons use, their only utility is for actual use or nuclear blackmail, also known as the ultimatum. Perhaps it would be better if world leaders worked to avoid or seek a quick end to conflicts before nuclear warnings, signals, gestures, or ultimatums became a factor.